This is my kitchen table, and it's also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
Well, I watch your interviews, so I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there.
You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right?
The United States has been hard hit by COVID, but even more hard hit have been some of the emerging markets, because they not only don't have access to COVID vaccines, they also don't have the money for those vaccines. One of the people who has been trying to make certain that they do have the money is David Malpass, the president of the World Bank. His mission as the president of the World Bank is to make certain that some of these countries have the necessary finances and necessary access to health care that they need for their people. Hello, I'm going to be in conversation today with David Malpass, who is the 13th president of the World Bank. David, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, David. Good to be here.
So for those people that don't know exactly what the World Bank is, can you describe what it actually does?
It's a development institution. So the goal is to help countries raise their living standards. We give loans and grants to countries in the developing world. It's been around since 1944. It was toward the end of World War II. It was part of the rebuilding effort. So part of what the World Bank tries to do is help countries with infrastructure investments, though heavily we're involved with healthcare, now with COVID, with education, and with climate issues, all of the range of development topics.
Where does the money come from for the World Bank?
The money comes from the shareholders. So the World Bank has several parts, actually 5 parts. One part is like an investment bank, where the equity holders are the governments of the world. The United States is the biggest shareholder. And then in addition, the World Bank borrows heavily. So for example, in the previous fiscal year, we borrowed $95 billion from global markets, from savers around the world. And that then is used to make loans. That's part of the bank side of the operation. And then another big part of the World Bank is donations from countries. The UK is the biggest donor. The United States is the second biggest donor, and on down. China is a major donor, and Saudi Arabia, and so on through the range of countries. And we are very grateful to all of the donors who put money into the World Bank group. That is then used for grants and very low interest rate loans for the poorest countries. So a big part of the World Bank's goals and operations are to help people that are in poverty, in extreme poverty, help them with social safety nets, with food programs, with food security programs, and a range of activities to help them do better in their lives and help save lives in the current pandemic.
Let's talk about the pandemic. So there's been a big concern that the wealthy countries like the United States or Western European countries will get the vaccine readily available to it and that it can afford to pay for it. How do people in the developing countries get access to the vaccine, and can they afford to pay for it?
These are big challenges. What we did as the World Bank in October, our board approved, and with the support of all these shareholder countries, the idea of $12 billion of financing. We can use that money to help set up vaccination systems in poor countries, also to buy vaccines from manufacturers, and also from COVAX, which is an international facility that's getting access to vaccines. So we're already in the process of deploying those vaccines. We've been working since October to do an assessment, one country at a time, and we've done now 96 assessments of their readiness to actually do the vaccines. The World Bank's been heavily involved in vaccination programs for many years, for decades, including polio and Ebola and measles and on down, HPV and AIDS, therapeutics, and so that the bank is able to help countries. Last week, we announced our first operation to buy vaccines and to begin the deployment of vaccines, and we'll have many more operations coming down the line now.
Well, when you put up $12 billion to buy vaccines for developing countries, that's a grant. You're not going to get that money back, right? That's not a loan.
It's actually part and part. So some portion are grants, some portion are loan. It depends country by country. The World Bank works very much on a specific relationship with each individual country. We have country directors and country managers in the various countries, and so some countries receive primarily grants. Some have grants and very low interest rate loans. This is, for example, 40-year loans at 0.75% per year. So it's a very concessional funding that makes it possible for them to do good work with the money that is coming in. So the $12 billion is going to be in the form of both grants and loans, and help the poorest countries, but also middle income developing countries. For example, Indonesia and the Philippines we're working with now, Bangladesh soon, and so on, with countries that are of varying capacity to actually deliver vaccines.
Well, when you make a loan that's a 40-year loan at 0.05% interest, it's almost a grant, but do you get paid back those loans, or they actually get paid back?
Yes, there's been a very good track record. The World Bank Group is a AAA rated credit. And in the previous fiscal year, we issued $95 billion of debt. And this year it'll be over that as part of the surge in financing. And so over the history of the World Bank, there's been a very good track record, in part because the World Bank and the IMF work together in a preferred creditor treatment with the borrowing countries. So they need to pay back the World Bank in order for the World Bank to make more grants and loans to other countries. There's a big reflow, therefore, from historical loans made 30 years ago are still paying into the World Bank, and we use that money to make new grants and loans.
But recently, I thought that some of the poorest countries in the world are unable to repay some of their outstanding corporate and sovereign debt, and you're helping to get them to be able to do that. Is that right?
That's right. There's a distinction. Individual countries make loans to other sovereigns. So the United States and Germany and Japan and China make loans to countries in Africa. Those are called official bilateral credits. And they've become a very large burden on the poorest countries. And so I've advocated that the countries be given a chance to defer payment on those loans. And then for those countries that are most heavily indebted, we need to look for a way for them to actually reduce the outstanding balance, the burden of their debts to richer countries. And so that process is going on, and it also extends, you mentioned, the commercial creditors. That includes banks and hedge funds, for example, that own bonds issued by these countries. The burden of the debt, especially with the pandemic, is too heavy for some of them to repay, and it falls on the poorest people in the world. The governments themselves often are made up of people that have resources, have means, but the people of the country, that's where the burden falls, and we're trying to lighten that burden.
How have you been running the bank during COVID? Are you at home yourself and running the bank or is everybody working remotely? How's that been doing?
You know, it's been remarkable. I've been mostly working at home, and most all of our employees are doing that. We're relatively decentralized by world standards. So different offices have different rules based on what's going on in their own local, in the countries that they're serving. So some of the offices are open, others are in lockdown of various sorts, but it's been working pretty well. Fortunately, the World Bank had prepared or had most of the people able to have access to a laptop. And so people have been working from home quite effectively. In fact, one of the problems that we've encountered is people are working harder because they're always online. You know, you're almost 24/7 because your phone can ring, your emails are going on, your boss may ask for a report or a piece of data. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is get people to pace themselves during the work from home period.
Let's talk about your own background for a moment. Where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in northern Michigan, a small town.
And your father was in the manufacturing business?
That's right. My father, his father, and his father were all in the East Jordan Iron Works. It's if you look around wherever you are in the United States, if you look at some of the castings in your streets, whether manhole covers or fire hydrants, they're often made by the East Jordan Iron Works, now called EJ Co. So I'm proud of it because my ancestors built it. My father worked very hard at it, and my cousins now run it in northern Michigan, and it's a very important employer, which I'm proud of.
How did you escape from running it yourself or being in the company? Were you just not interested in that?
Family businesses are hard to keep intact. So other cousins were more involved, and my family had moved to Colorado, so my attention went elsewhere. But I did stay. I'm very interested in iron, but also in steel. So my first job out of college was with the steel mills.
So you went to college at Colorado College, and you got your MBA at University of Denver. Did you know you wanted to be an economist when you were in college and graduate school? Is that what you really wanted to be?
So Colorado College and University of Denver, I was very grateful to have a Becher Foundation scholarship, which kept me in Colorado. At that time, that was the 70s. So I graduated from college in 76, and people in those days didn't have such a focused sense of where they were going. So I was looking for work. Just getting a job in those days was hard. The summer after my college graduation, I worked at McDonald's and was proud to get a promotion at McDonald's. And then I worked for the steel company that I mentioned to you. And so that was a way to begin doing tasks and do them better and better. At that time, I knew that I wanted to be in international affairs, so I gradually gravitated that way when I could get jobs.
And ultimately, you went to work in the George Bush administration, also the Reagan administrations. So your goal in life was presumably to tell other people about where the economies are going. That was your expertise. Is that right?
I was in the Treasury Department, the State Department, and so my original approach from age 10, it was all about geography and about geopolitics and where countries are going.
And then you ultimately gravitated to Wall Street. You worked in Wall Street as an economist for a while.
That's for over 20 years, I'm afraid, from 1993 until 2016. So that was pure Wall Street. I did a lot of markets, a lot of international markets around the world. So from China to Turkey to South Africa to all points in between. And it was very much related to where will growth occur, what will happen to interest rates, what will happen to currencies in terms of their upward and downward movements.
There seems to be an understanding that the IMF, which is also headquartered in Washington, the International Monetary Fund, that the head of it would be picked more or less by Europe, and that the head of the World Bank would be picked more or less by the United States president, and you were picked by President Trump. But is that going to continue forever, where the U.S. gets to pick the World Bank and the IMF gets to be selected by Europe? Is that going to continue, you think?
I don't know what the future will bring. I'm trying to do my job well. I was proposed by President Trump, but then I met with the major shareholders and was unanimously chosen by the board of the World Bank based on experience, based on commitment to development. So I'm looking forward to that job. And I don't know how the future relationships will go. It's been very interesting to see the IMF with Kristalina Georgieva, who's a good friend. She's from a small country in Europe. So that's a diversification. Traditionally, the IMF had one of the big European countries be the head of the IMF. So there's change going on. I welcome that.
So the term of being the president of the World Bank is 5 years. And you were appointed in April of 2019. You took your job. So you've got a number of years to go. But there's also a tradition that the new president, even if he is from a different party, doesn't usually replace the president of the World Bank if he's from a different party. Is that fair? It's kind of an apolitical position?
Yeah, that's right. And that goes with the character of the World Bank itself, which is non-political, and also the historical relationship between the World Bank and its various large shareholders. So I'm really looking forward to working with the Biden administration on common interests. You know, everyone really wants to see development be well done and have a lifting effect for people all over the world. That's the goal, and I think we're having a positive impact.
We're in the beginning of 2021. Is that going to be a good year for the global economy, or what are your biggest worries?
I think a lot of countries are still in substantial trouble, and COVID is, as you know, is still very omnipresent around the world.
So you're an economist, you know, based on your background, how to project what economies are going to do around the world. Tell us now, we're in the beginning of 2021. Is that going to be a good year for the global economy, or what are your biggest worries?
One thing that happened in 2020 was the world didn't slow as much as people had feared. And so the forecasts for 2021 are actually being brought down because the starting point was a little higher than expected. So I'm pretty cautious on 2021. I think a lot of countries are still in substantial trouble, and COVID is, as you know, is still very omnipresent around the world. So we've thought that a critical variable is to get vaccinations done for as many people as possible. That will help in the GDP outlook, in the growth outlook. Reopening schools is a critical variable because both from the education standpoint, also it enables people to be at their jobs working if the schools are open. So that's a key variable, and the World Bank is very involved in education. Now, one thing I should mention is the inequality of the current world environment. It's troubling, and I think it's actually getting worse, which is a big challenge.
So are you worried about COVID really becoming the dominant economic issue for 2021 as well? In other words, it doesn't go away, and it really hurts the economies in developing markets much more than the developed markets?
Yes, and there are many aspects of that. One is simply having global growth slow really hurts poor people because they're dependent on trying to catch up, on getting advancement. Also, remittances have been down. That's the money that's sent back home by workers that are across their borders, outside their borders, and that's gone down a lot. So that's a big blow to the developing world. And then new investment simply has been much slower. One thing the World Bank has tried to do is supply, and I pushed in April of 2020 that we wanted to be in working capital and trade finance. This is the short end of what companies need in order to keep their private sector companies and businesses operating. And because the banking system had really reduced its offerings in these poorer countries. So we've been successful in that, a big ramp up of working capital and trade finance. And I think that's helped in trying to build resilience. but I am concerned, as you say, that it could be another slow or harmful year, and especially that's true of people's health, nutrition. One thing we're doing to combat that is social safety nets, just getting cash to people so that they can, and especially to women, so that they can buy food for their family, they can pay for some kind of transport to education, or at least survive during the crisis. That's been one priority.
Now, I would imagine that you have to convince members of Congress from time to time to increase the support of the United States for the World Bank. The members of Congress say, whatever you want, we'll give it to you, or you have to go up and really lobby for that?
There's some of both. You know, Congress has been pretty supportive, both Republicans and Democrats, of the work of the World Bank. I mentioned the grant making and the very concessional resources of the part of the World Bank called IDA, the International Development Association. It's had broad support, and it gets an annual appropriation from the U.S. Congress, but also from from Great Britain, from China, and other parts from around the world. And it's strongly supported by this big coalition of countries because of the effectiveness of the work. You know, part of this is who does an effective job of getting aid to the poorer countries. So the World Bank's had support in that way.
So when you're the president of the World Bank, if you want to call the president of China or the prime minister of Britain, how long does it take to get a call returned? Can you just get them on the phone right away? You have to take a day or two? How long does it take to get somebody on the phone when you're the president of the World Bank? I assume not long.
Not long. You know, I've been very fortunate to have good relations. When President Trump mentioned me for the World Bank, then I met with all the leaders and have maintained those relationships. So, for example, last week I spoke with President Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa. He's the head of the African Union. And those are good relationships where the World Bank is very actively engaged in what the countries are doing, what they're trying to achieve. And I try to be very knowledgeable on what the goals of each of the leaders is. President Macron has been heavily involved in various aspects of the global agenda. Prime Minister Johnson of the UK, same thing, very engaged. Canada, of course, Prime Minister Trudeau, very engaged. And so I've benefited from relationships with them through the G7, through the G20, and that extends to China and India and so on.
So how do you, the head of a World Bank, keep his ego in check? Because when you go overseas and to some of these poor countries, you're a god there because you can make a big decision about how much money they get. I assume it can go to your head a bit. And then when you come back to Washington, D.C., you might go to a restaurant. People might not even know who you are because the World Bank's not as visible here. So how do you deal with that contrast?
That's exactly right. I was amazed when I did my first trip at the amount of attention that the World Bank president got, and actually the support and the welcome, the very warm welcome. I went first to Madagascar and to Mozambique, to Ethiopia, and it was a very warm welcome wherever I landed. But, you know, I keep my eye on the job. I worked for Secretary Baker, as I mentioned, in the Reagan and then in the Bush 41 administration. And he was very hardworking. And the goal as a public servant is to look at the problem, try to find solutions, and then try to figure out how to actually enact those solutions. So I'm used to that as a real goal, and I'm not that much into the trappings of the office.
Well, David, I want to thank you very much for an interesting conversation about the World Bank, and thank you for your service to the World Bank and to our country, in effect, by serving as the president of the World Bank.
Thank you, David. Nice to be with you.